I came in when Siakam was here. Did not know that he was going to be this good in the NBA. I don't think anybody knew that. When programs are winning, there's a lot of good things to talk about.
I can tell it's about to be dead air almost immediately. I'm just going to pick it back up.
I cleaned bathrooms. I picked up trash in the parking lot the day after games. I was squeegeeing the concourse during rain delays. So I'm like, yeah, I'm talking to myself, but I also envision that I'm talking to somebody driving around town listening on the radio.
Yep.
And he looks at me and goes, excuse me? I think the Nick Gonzalez story of just how he got there and how he progressed is probably the coolest one to tell nowadays, because who would have thought New Mexico State would have a top 10 pick?
Right.
And who would have thought that New Mexico State would have a top 10 pick that, you know, was a walk-on originally, a preferred walk-on.
All right. So my first question for you is the athletes that you've been able to see, you've seen tons of them throughout your career. What are the top 5 that come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, that's really hard to just pick a couple. So if I could do like 7 or 8, that would probably be more ideal, just because I'm covering like 7 sports, Trey. So,
yeah,
you know, if I go sport to sport, I'll start with football. I'd probably go Larry Rose III, and I know it wasn't the best Aggie teams, but some of the performances he had on the field were just remarkable. And I feel like, you know, if he could have been on the teams the last couple of years, the attention he would have got, what he could have done, would have been pretty remarkable. So Larry kind of sticks out for me for football. Volleyball, probably Gwen Murphy. I think that was during your time a little bit.
Yeah.
Gwen was just a phenomenal athlete and a really good player on some really good NCAA tournament teams. Basketball, Brooke Salas on the women's side. You know, she's one of the best players, probably top 2 or 3 best players in the history of the program. And I got to call all of her games for 4 years. On the men's side, it's almost impossible to limit it to just a couple. But if I had to, Siakam, of course, I came in when Siakam was here. Did not know that he was going to be this good in the NBA. I don't think anybody knew that on the New Mexico State side. Jamario Jones, what he got out of his frame at 6'3", 6'4", 160 pounds was cool to watch. And then softball, probably Kelsey Horton. You know, when Kelsey did not hit a home run, you were surprised.
Yeah.
In the way opponents pitched to her, there was so much respect from the opposition, and she's one of the best, if not the best players in the history of that program. And then baseball, you know, it was the same time period, right? With Gonzalez and Ortiz and Bradish. I think you have to mention all 3 guys. You know, what those 3 guys did here, and then what they've done professionally beyond New Mexico State has been really cool to see.
No, absolutely. So you've gotten some really big time, because it's funny because whenever I got to New Mexico State, it was 2010, and you really don't think at that time beyond basketball of really greatness, maybe softball. But then we move into kind of this new era, and we've seen football do well. Soccer, girls have been phenomenal as well, right? I mean, there's just a lot of excellence going on through New Mexico State. Where do you think that pivot happened? And maybe is there a culture change?
That's a good question. You know, Mario Mocha came in 2 months after I came in, and, you know, we just started winning a lot. Yeah. And of course, Chris Jans, you know, Paul Weir, the 1 year before that, Marvin Menzies went to a lot of NCAA tournaments. You know, what Jerry Kill's done with football the last 2 years, you know, is unprecedented. And you mentioned softball. You know, Kathy's been consistent in softball, and it goes to coaches too, right? I mean, Mike Jordan and Kathy Rudolph, both coaches have been here for 20 plus years. And when you have that kind of consistency in a program, you can build a culture over time. And then when the players come in, they know what to expect. And it's harder now with the transfer portal and with NIL. You know, but I think winning's contagious. In a place like New Mexico State, the coaches know each other well and they support each other. And I think if you're, you know, the baseball head coach and you see basketball doing well, or if you're the basketball head coach and you see soccer doing well, I think there's maybe a domino effect at a place like this where it's a smaller department, it's a mid-major, and a lot of people know each other, and winning can be contagious. And that happened, you know, probably starting in 2015 or 16, you know, a couple of years after I got here. You know, it just seemed like everybody was winning, and it was cool for me because it made my job a lot easier. When programs are winning, there's a lot of good things to talk about.
No, absolutely. Okay, so guys, thank you for checking out the All Sports Best podcast. Today we have Adam Young on. I actually have, it's hard to list out what you do. You do play-by-play, you do video, behind the scenes, interviews. What do you not do for media at New Mexico State? I mean, it's truly a lot.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Trey. I mean, it goes back to being at a mid-major. You just have to do a lot. My background coming up was in minor league baseball, which is good because when you work in minor league baseball, even if you're the voice of a team, that's not the only job you have. If you want to be full-time in minor league baseball, I mean, you're the mascot sometimes, you're the community relations director, you're the media relations director, you sell, you speak at engagements, you do everything. So that background really helped me here because I've been able to kind of capitalize on the opportunities available here where they let me do 7 sports. I'm doing the coach's show on radio. I'm doing a lot of content. I'm doing all of our podcasts. I mean, I built our podcast platform basically from the ground up during COVID. So, and then we've done a lot of video, content as well. It's a little bit harder because you are at a mid-major where you're limited in resources, but I take a lot of pride in the work that I do and the place that I'm at. I love being here. I love representing the brand. Yeah. And, I like being at a place that allows me to do this many sports because people ask me all the time, how many sports do you do? And I say 7. They're like, how do you juggle that? And it's tough, but it's also what I want to do. I don't want to be minimalized to just a couple. I'd rather do it this way. And try to be as versatile as possible.
Adam, for you, it all started with a summer ball team from what I did some research on. Can you throw it back to that time and maybe some of the things that you still have today that you learned or maybe adjusted?
Yeah, Trey. I mean, I graduated on, I guess it would have been a Friday or a Saturday. And the next day at 6 a.m., I was driving out to Fayetteville, North Carolina. Oh. I had accepted a summer collegiate job, Wood Bat League, back in January of my senior year of college. And true to form and how this business works, I mean, they had me doing work months in advance. And I mean, it was low pay, but I was the voice of the team. I was their media relations director. I did some sales. I did some community relations stuff, speaking engagements. I did everything. I mean, I cleaned bathrooms. I picked up trash in the parking lot the day after games. I was squeegeeing the concourse during rain delays. Oh yeah, it was, but it was one of those deals where I loved it. It was probably one of the most important summers of my life because I understood that, okay, there's way more than just the 9 innings you get to call, during the course of a game.
Sure.
And I embraced that. I didn't complain about it. And I got to do, a baseball game every single night. So I was in heaven. It was awesome. The team name was the Fayetteville Swamp Dogs. It was in the Coastal Plain League, a really good summer collegiate league. I got to see a bunch of future big leaguers. We had one on the team that I called games for, Carter Capps. Okay. Carter was an all-star a couple of years ago with the Mariners, and cool story behind that. So he pitches in the big leagues for 7 or 8 years, and I mean, he was throwing 97 back in college, and he was a converted catcher, so he was still in the infancy of pitching. And he is now the pitching coach at Seattle University in the WAC. So a couple of years ago, Carter shows up, and I, of course, had done some research and saw that he was their pitching coach, and I went down there and he said, "I know you." And I said, "Yeah, I called your games in 2010 for, 3 months." And he's like, "The Fayetteville Swamp Dogs." And we talked for a while. It was cool. I mean, a lot of those guys, you get to know them a little bit and you follow their careers, whether it be in baseball or just in life. And, you build relationships, even though you're only with them for a couple months.
Yeah. So with all of the jobs that you did that summer, was it by design? Like they wanted you to go ahead and do these things so that you had more material to speak on, or it was just like, hey, we need a guy that does everything?
Everybody there did everything.
Okay.
I mean, it's such a small front office. Yeah. I mean, in reality, I think they had, 3 or 4 full timers. The field manager for the team was also the general manager. The way these operations run, Trey, it's small operations. They rely heavily on college kids or people just out of college who are trying to, get that break. And same goes for the broadcaster. I got to host a TV show though, or in Time Warner Cable in North Carolina. Through that, I mean, there were so many good things
That's really cool.
that it outweighed all the tough stuff. And then,
Mm.
a quick story behind that. And then the summer ends, so I go back to St. Louis. I got a bunch of college gigs lined up, and a job opened up with a minor league team that I had interned with 2 summers prior, going into my senior year. An independent baseball team, 20 minutes from home. They had a really good setup where they were on an all sports station for their games on radio. And the guy who had done it, one of my mentors, basically stepped aside after I think 12 years, and he had taken a full-time job at a D1 university over there. And I interviewed for the job, and with these jobs, everybody and their mother wants it. And there were people way more qualified than me, a 21, 22-year-old kid who was just getting a start.
Sure.
And I go in the interview, and I literally told the general manager, I will clean bathrooms and clean the concession stand. And he looks at me and goes, excuse me? I was like, I was just doing that in my last gig, like I had, that was part of it. And he's like, so you'll clean like bathrooms and clean the concession stand? And I'm like, hey man, I just want a chance to call games. And
that's cool.
I left the interview and I'm like, what the heck did I just do? Like, why did I say that? And he calls me 2 days later and he's like, hey, I love your energy. I love like how much you want this, and you are not the most qualified person on the air, age or experience, but I'm going to hire you.
Wow.
And I got the job, and it wasn't based off that, but he could see that I was going to work for it, and I was not going to complain about anything. And it was a full-time gig, and it was a huge break in my career. It's probably the biggest break that I've had so far, and it's led to a lot of other stuff behind it. But you have to be a team player. I say this all the time. Like, nobody wants somebody with this big ego that says, this is what I do. I will not do anything else to help the team.
Right.
And I view it as a team. If we're calling a game on television, it is a team effort. If I don't perform at a high level, we're going to struggle. If our camera operator doesn't do that, or if our producer struggles, or so on and so forth, it's a collective effort in so much that we do. And it goes back to, those early days when I had to do a lot, and I was okay with it, especially early on.
Yeah. Speaking of being on a team, chemistry is huge on the air, right? Radio play-by-play, or being on video broadcasting, those types of things. Who are some of the people that you've had a chance to work with that you feel like maybe you remember that because it was just so smooth?
Yeah, I mean, I have unbelievable TV partners that I get to do games with. Like I said, I'm doing 7 sports, and across the board, I have great relationships with all of them. And a lot of them I've worked with ever since I got here. So that makes it so much easier. And if you're doing television, Trey, as opposed to radio, with radio, the play-by-play person has to cover so much ground because the person can't see what's happening. So you're trying to get in, get out.
Yeah.
The color analyst has a small window to talk. On TV, we can talk over action. It's okay. We'll have replays. We can talk over that stuff. So my job is to set up my analyst and try to help them be the star of the show. And I have analysts that either played or coached at an extremely high level, and I'm not the expert. And I tell them that all the time when they come in and they ask for advice, like, what do I say here? What do I say there? And I always tell them, hey, talk about your past experiences. You coached in an NCAA tournament, or you played against Nebraska, Danny, my color analyst, in football. It's like, you have these experiences that I don't have. So my job is to get the nuts and bolts down and then to set it up for you. And I mean, I can't say enough about the analysts I've worked with here. And then, I do a lot of freelance stuff too. And that could be a tough part of this, is when you kind of parachute in and you meet somebody for the first time, and it's like, okay, let's go do a game together. And you need to know their background and kind of, strengths and weaknesses. But that's a really tough part of this business sometimes, is when you're doing freelance stuff and they're also freelancing, and you're meeting them for the first time before you call a game.
Yeah. And I also kind of wondered, because when you have chemistry, it's easy, right? Whenever I say something and you can kind of tell, I'm handing it off to you. You know what my cadences are, kind of how that works. But if it's brand new, there's a lot that, you have to do to adjust to yourself. So is there any like tried and true methods that you've used that it's like, okay, I can tell it's about to be dead air almost immediately, I'm just going to pick it back up, or it's just natural now?
Good question. That's really hard, especially when you're working with somebody new. With the analysts that I have here, like I said, I've worked with all of them pretty much since the start. There's a couple of them that came in a year or two later. So I know when they're going to talk. They know when I'm going to talk. It's pretty much carefree during the course of a broadcast. But if you're doing a tournament, especially, and I've done a lot of conference tournaments, especially for the WAC, where you're working with an analyst maybe you haven't worked with before, and you're doing 10, 11, 12 games over the course of 3 or 4 days. And by day 3 or 4, you're finally getting that rhythm with them, and then it's over. But it takes time. It really does. It takes time to pick that up. And the cool thing about this too is the analysts that I work with, they are not trained broadcasters, right? They're doing this not because they want to go to ESPN and call a national championship. They're doing this because it's a cool little side job, and they played here or they coached here, and they have that resume to do it. So you have to keep in mind as well that, these people aren't used to somebody talking in their ear, like a producer is telling them something while they're talking. That can spook them a little bit.
Yeah.
So you have to help them along, as time goes on, because they don't have that experience like I do, and they weren't trained to do this. They didn't go to school for this, all that kind of stuff, which makes it unique in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so I was also wondering, kind of building off of the dead air type of thing, is how much time you dedicate towards vocabulary. I'll catch myself getting a lot of the same reactions, and I'm like, dang, I shouldn't have said absolutely for the 5th time that podcast. What do you do to practice? Do you sit there and kind of like go over things, or it's just over time?
That's a good question. I actually have a play-by-play thesaurus sheet for every sport I do. And I don't know exactly how this started, why it started, when it started. I think it was actually my first or second year out of college, where I just one day during the off season, I just went to work and I wrote down all the different ways you can say a rebound or a pass or a shot or a miss or describe the floor. And it's one of those things. It's actually gone viral around the country, and a lot of broadcasters use the same play-by-play thesaurus sheet that I use for basketball and baseball and football. And it's one of those things where it's so important in broadcasting that you don't repeat the same stuff over and over. And I think where it came from for me was back when I was doing minor league baseball. If you're calling a game every night, and let's be honest, if you're doing minor league baseball, it's probably a niche listenership. A lot of the people that are listening are family and friends of the players.
Right.
And they're trying to keep close tabs on what, Bobby's doing in St. Louis during his, pro days. And if they're listening to you every night and they hear you describe a ground ball to third the same way for 105 nights out of a summer, they're going to, be annoyed, right? I mean, you have to keep it fresh. And so I do the same thing when I'm on a broadcast, and I critique every game I do. With a baby now, it's a little harder to go back and listen to every single game or watch every single game in full in its entirety. But without fail, I'll go back and watch stretches and listen to stretches of every game I do, just to make sure I'm not getting in any bad habits.
Wow.
And it might seem like nothing to a general fan. Like, nobody's probably going to notice that Adam called a rebound, he corralled it 3 straight possessions. Nobody's probably going to notice, but I notice, and there's a million different ways I can describe how he got that rebound. And that means a lot to me. I think this is, to a lot of people, it's like a hobby or whatever, but to me, this, I take it very serious, and I try to be the best I can be every single night. So if you want to be really, really polished at this, you need to go back and listen to your stuff and watch your stuff after games.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's just crazy to think that did you create the thesaurus that's out there?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
They're just, nobody had really done it. So it's made its rounds. There's this publication called Sportscasters Talent Agency of America. And they have it up on their website. So a lot of young broadcasters, especially young broadcasters, will pull it each year. And I share it each year on social media before, like basketball. I'll post on social and say, hey, here it is for anybody that wants to use it. And it's not much, but I do think it helps people. So I do look over it before almost every game. I'm not looking at it during a game and saying crossing off corralled, cleared, snag the rebound. I'm not crossing them off as the game goes on, but I do think if you look over it and refresh it before the game, it's in your mind and it'll be a little easier to vary your vocabulary during the course of the game.
So it's not your bingo card, just going through it.
It is not my bingo card. No, but it could be.
Yeah.
If somebody wants to grab a copy, it could turn into a bingo card if they're watching back at home.
Absolutely. So actually, with that, could you off the top of your head go over how many different words you have for shot in basketball? What do you have?
Yeah, I mean, as far as make a shot,
Sure.
Is that what you want?
Yeah.
Connects, drops in, splashes. He got it. Knocks it down. Bang. Yes, sir. Bullseye.
Wow.
Yeah,
you've got it. You got it.
Misfires, shallow, short, back rim, heel, skips off the rim, rattles out, rattles in, swirls away. It's ingrained in your brain now.
Yeah.
But you can't get too crazy with it. I remember I was doing a game on radio early on in my career, and I said somebody had a yo-yo dribble, and it's like they're standing there and just dribbling it up and down like a yo-yo.
Sure.
And my parents listen and watch every game, and my mom after the game said, "Hey, I got a question. You were saying somebody had a yo-yo dribble. What does that mean?" And I'm like, and I explained it to her, and she goes, "Oh, that makes sense." And I'm like, "Yeah, but if she can't figure it out, and she's a very smart sports fan, if she can't figure it out as I'm calling a game on radio, why am I describing that?" So I haven't used it since. I've heard people use it, but I haven't used it since because you don't want to speak over a listener's head or a viewer's head, right? I mean, you try to keep it as basic as possible. And I've heard broadcasters do that too, where they use words and I'm like, what does that even mean?
Sure.
So you want to try to keep it as basic as possible and not speak down to your listener or the viewer, but not also try to do too much.
You don't want to make them feel like they just can't keep up, because that's the whole
100%.
point. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think about it all the time. If I'm doing a baseball game on radio, for example, and people say, well, what are you thinking about whenever you're sitting in a booth by yourself and calling a game? Like, you're basically talking to yourself. I'm like, yeah, I'm talking to myself, but I also envision that I'm talking to somebody driving around town listening on the radio.
Yep.
Right? And they need to know what the inning is. They need to know what the score is. Maybe they missed the first 4 innings. What the heck happened if it's 11-10, which at Presley Askew Field in the 5th inning, 11-10 is highly possible, right?
Hell yeah.
So I mean, recap. I mean, there's a lot of different nuances that you put yourself in their shoes. What would they want to hear, or what would you want to hear if you were driving around and you missed the first 4 innings and you have no idea what happened as you pop in the car, but you have an interest in the game. So, I think about that often, especially when I'm doing it on radio.
When you talk about the time that it takes in a game, some of these games are very long. Football games take a while. Baseball games are insane sometimes, especially when you say 11-10 in the 5th inning. Yeah, that's a long game. Do you do some types of exercises geared towards this, like breathing exercises, cadences, paces that you use to make sure that you're not losing breath on air, especially by yourself?
Honestly, it's I do a lot of conference tournaments, Trey, where I'm calling 4 games in a day sometimes.
Wow.
And you try to take care of your voice as much as possible. So you'll suck on lozenges. I use these extra strong lozenges that somebody introduced me to them back in the day. They're called Fisherman's Friend.
Okay.
And they taste awful, but they are really, really good to keep your voice going. And actually a lot of singers use them when they perform. So I'll use those during the course of a game. They are life changers, game savers during the course of a conference tournament when you're doing 4 games one day, 3 games the next, 2 the next, that kind of stuff. I've done a lot of that. And so I don't think there's anything particular that I do. I stay away from soda. You just watch what you eat, watch what you drink, and make sure you're taking care of your body and your voice properly going into it. I don't do any breathing exercise or, I'm not in the booth, like Ron Burgundy, saying a bunch of different words, trying to get prep for a broadcast
Oh yeah.
necessarily. But you just try to take care of your voice as much as possible. I've been at this for a while. It's hard to imagine. I mean, I graduated from college in 2010, so you just pick up different stuff over time,
Yeah.
I think. And I called a game. Speaking of voice and trying to take care of it, I called a game on December 30th, right out of Christmas, and I went into it with almost no voice.
Wow.
And I've never called off for a game, and I almost pulled the trigger on this one, and I got done and I could barely talk. So you kind of gotta figure it out as you go, right? I mean, sometimes broadcasters play hurt a little bit too, right? It's not just the players, and but you realize how important the voice is for what we do, and you just try to find ways to get through it.
Is volume control pretty important as well? Like not screaming and a goal? Okay.
100%. It's where you can distinguish maybe the more inexperienced younger broadcaster from somebody who's maybe more of a vet. I screamed a ton early on. Everybody does. But you learn over time that screaming is not helping.
Sure.
You try to control your voice. You want to, of course, have high energy and all that kind of stuff. Honestly, and I'm sure you're going to probably talk about this later, as far as like the best moment that, you have. And my call that I'm the most proud of is the Johnny McCants buzzer beater, because it would have been really easy to lose my absolute mind over it. And I stayed controlled. I stayed composed. And that's not a pat on the back to me. That's just, I think I was ready for a moment. And, it took time. I mean, if you go back and listen to my tapes early on in college and out of college, I'm sure I screamed a ton, but that's the call that I'm the most proud of, because if you look at the technical side of broadcasting, like don't scream, don't say too much, don't make the moment about you, get out of the way. I was happy with that call. And there's a million, game ending plays or whatever that I've called that I'm like, oh man, I should have done this. I should have done that. I should have done this. But that was one where I'm like, I'll take that. Like I didn't scream. I got out of the way. Economy of words. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. And our crew was awesome with the pictures on TV where, you got to see the guys dogpiling. So to kind of get off topic a bit, but stay on topic as far as screaming. Yeah, that's huge. I can't, I don't like it when I hear a broadcaster screaming. It's just, control your voice. There's no need to scream. It's your voice is an instrument, and use it properly whenever you're calling a game.
All right. So when you go to these games, a lot of times media has hospitality rooms. You have a media credential. They've got something for you, especially in tournaments and things like that when there's a lot going on. What do you do? What's your method in those hospitality rooms? Do you have a go-to drink or food that you love, or how does that work?
It's interesting because I get this question a lot from people. And back when I was coming up, when I was in college, I got the opportunity to cover the Cardinals, the Rams, and the Blues for the college radio station I was at back in St. Louis. And, the spread of the Cardinals games was awesome. Back when the Rams were in St. Louis, the spread for like a noon start was just the best breakfast you could possibly have, buffet style. But now that I do play-by-play, I rarely, if ever, eat anything or drink anything at the stadium. So I'm one of those people where I know if I'm doing a football game, I'm going to be on the air for probably 3.5, maybe 4 hours, depending on how the game's going, and I don't get a break. So if we go to halftime, I'm still covering halftime. If we go to commercial break, that's 2 minutes. So, I am really watching how much water I drink during the course of the game. These hydration packets are, I think, game changers for me too, because I can drink one of those during the game, and I'm not going to get dehydrated if I'm not drinking a ton of water.
Okay.
I really, really watch what I eat on game day. Like before a game, I am, there's very few things that I will eat during the day before a game. So just because you just know you can't go to the bathroom, you're going to be in a spot for a long period of time, even if it's basketball. And with baseball, who knows, right? If it goes extras, you could be there for 4.5 hours.
Yeah.
So I don't get to partake in the hospitality food all that often. I do think back to the days of when I was in college covering the Cardinals, the Rams, and the Blues, though, and those professional spreads were next level. I mean,
I
it
bet.
was good food, especially for a college kid who didn't have a lot of money probably, and was looking for a good meal. But the best hospitality food since I've been here are probably at the conference tournaments.
Okay.
Usually, the WAC tournament usually has pretty good meals. So I think about those conference tournaments probably more than anything. The bowl games have been pretty good the last 2 years as far as the food they feed you there. It's a little more than what you would get during a regular season game. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's my best answer. I wish I could say, this place has good food or that place has good food, but I don't get to partake very often.
It's a risk. Definitely a risk.
It is a risk.
So
Yeah, it's a big risk, and you don't have a studio or an analyst that can just take over and
yeah.
let you break for 10 or 15 minutes.
Yeah, you'll have fans wondering where this guy went. That was the guy. What's going on?
Right? Yeah, right.
So when you get into these booths, obviously there's different levels of booths, right? So how well it's set up, the space, the air conditioning, even noises in the background. I'm sure there's 1,000 variables that comes with each different booth. Do you have a favorite or a couple of favorites, and then maybe this was the worst experience?
I got a lot of bad ones.
Oh,
I
okay.
probably won't call out. I probably won't call out many venues. When you do minor league baseball, it is completely hit or miss. Some
Okay.
are great, some are not good. And I'm sure the players could talk about the travel experiences too, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's when you're doing minor league baseball. Some hotels are good, some hotels aren't, because the visiting team usually gets the hotel for the team coming in. Um, Probably the best booth. I've done a couple of games in the SEC, Missouri and Kentucky for football. Kentucky was pretty good.
Mm.
Um, Honestly, I mean, I really like our view at New Mexico State for football. It's open air, but it's like the perfect spot. You're not too high, you're not too low. I really like that spot for calling football. I really do, and that's not me just being biased.
Sure.
It's important to be at the 50-yard line, not be too high, not be too low. So I really do like the view for football games there. I'd probably say Kentucky's probably the best. Mizzou is good too, but I probably favor Kentucky. And then when I think back to my early years, I was doing Division II baseball, Trey, on the roof of the basketball gym at the place I was calling the games. So
Really?
I did games. I did games at McHenry University. It's in Lebanon, Illinois. It's just outside of St. Louis. And when I was coming up right out of college, I was doing all their sports, and they didn't have a press box for baseball. So they had us set up on the roof of the basketball gym. So you'd have to climb the ladder to
Wow.
get to the roof. And I hate heights, so that was a tough deal altogether. So you climb the ladder and you call the game up top, and you're in the elements. Like if it's 30 degrees in February and they're playing a home game, and it's not fun.
That is a
But
nightmare.
yeah, so it was okay. It was a decent view, but for somebody who doesn't like heights and is climbing that ladder with stuff strapped on your back, it's a tough one. So I think of that.
Ooh.
I could list off 5 or 6 ballparks that were a little dicey back in summer collegiate wood bat league and then in minor league baseball. But you make it what it is. Sometimes you get your own booth. Sometimes you're calling a game in the middle of the entire press area where everybody's at. People are talking. People are having full on conversations. I did a conference tournament a couple of years ago where we were outside for this softball tournament, and there was no shade over us. I did not have a hat or anything, and my head was like
Oh.
completely sun. Like I had like the worst sunburn on my head because I got like no hair, and yeah, that was tough. Like my eyes were watering. It was so bad. It was so. I
Really?
mean, you're in the I mean, and if you're doing a conference tournament, you're out there for like 10 or 11 or 12 hours straight. That's
Yeah.
just what you're doing for an entire day. I remember one time called a baseball series at Sacramento State, no press box, calling the game in the concourse, didn't bring a hat or sunscreen or anything. In my head, after day one, was fried. So you have to bring what you need for the elements, but sometimes you don't know what you're getting into.
Sure. Yeah, and I don't think I've ever seen you on a broadcast wearing a hat. So that's a rarity. I guess you had to adjust on day 2 at some of these places, right?
It was a rarity. Yes. I think I think I actually put a towel on my head because I had a towel for my
Oh,
equipment. I think I put it on there at one point late in the first game. I just remember people coming down to me saying, "Sir, do you need like an umbrella or something? Like your head is getting fried." And I'm like, "Yeah, I mean, if you got something."
yeah.
People were concerned for me. I actually, this is funny, Trey. This is no knock on UNM, I promise. But UNM has a very small press box for baseball, and I think it was my first year. My first year here, we're up there, and it's windy in March, April, and it was like 40-mile-an-hour winds, and they got me a tent, but the tent was like lifting up
My
as the game's
gosh.
going on, and I'm like, this tent's gonna blow, it's gonna blow over, and I think they went and got the tent and took it away, but I mean, if you're doing a game at UNM, you're calling the game from the bleachers, basically.
Okay.
Which it's people complain about that kind of stuff, and I'm like, if you want to do high school sports, people are calling the game from their pickup truck and just different. I mean,
Oh
different
yeah.
stuff, because in high school, not everybody has great facilities, so it is what it is. You just get through it. You try not to think about it, but I'll never forget that UNM baseball game because that tent was coming up, and I'm like, this is not going to end well, and well, the game ended, and I came out just fine. But I'll
That's
never
good.
forget that.
Yeah, they didn't
Yeah,
take you with it, huh? Yeah, no, there's
yeah.
definitely windy games over there. A lot of windy games in Las Cruces as well. So you're used to the wind, just not being exposed to it at that level.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
Yeah.
cool if I'm inside in the press
Yeah.
box when it's windy.
Sure.
But yeah, it makes for some interesting games. I didn't know until I got here how windy it was, like during baseball and softball. And if that wind's blowing out over at the baseball field on a Sunday, I mean, you walk in the door and you're like, we could be here for a while.
Yeah.
Now, games nowadays, Trey, I mean, it's amazing how the pitch clock has changed things. Because what used to be a 4-hour game has sped up to like a 3-hour game. I mean, it's games move swift now.
That's huge.
So that's been a huge change.
Yeah. All right. So you've had a chance to call about different athletes. We talked about this at the very beginning of the show. Some of your favorite athletes or some of the best that you've seen. But every time that you go out there, especially on a video broadcast, you have to come up with some research. You're talking about different athletes' stories and maybe, hey, I talked to so and so before the game. Those kinds of things. Is there any or a few stories that stand out and you're just like, I remember this guy because this happened to him or anything like that?
Ooh, I think the Nick Gonzalez story of just how he got there and how he progressed is probably the coolest one to tell nowadays, because who would have thought New Mexico State would have a top 10 pick?
Right.
And who would have thought that New Mexico State would have a top 10 pick that, was a walk-on originally, a preferred walk-on. So his story is cool. Daniel Johnson's story, I don't know if many people know Daniel's story, but Daniel was cut from New Mexico State at one point,
Yeah.
went to a JUCO, came back, basically knocked on Brian Green's door and said, "Hey, they told me to come back," and
Crazy.
goes out there and turns into what was he, a fourth round pick, if I'm not fifth round pick, I think,
Mm,
and a big leaguer.
yeah.
So baseball probably has the craziest stories. I don't think there's other sports quite like it. Kyle Bradish had one Division I offer.
Crazy.
I mean, and now he's in the Cy Young race. So the Knicks story is unique. Daniel Johnson's story is unique just because they were walk-ons, right? And if you're a walk-on, you're supposed to not be that good. and
Right.
eventually get drafted and make that your career as a professional baseball player. So those really stick out to me. I don't know if I could think of any other ones. I mean, Larry Rose III had one FBS offer, and they wanted him to play defensive back. I mean, we were the only school that offered him to play running back at this level. So, I mean, you come across stuff like that all the time where, the kids came here with little interest and had a chip on their shoulder and then made, a lot out of it, right? When they
Yeah.
got here, and they kind of played that way the entire way. But there's been injuries, right, where somebody maybe tore their ACL early on in their career, had Tommy John or something, and then bounced back and found a way to finish off their career on a high note. But I think the baseball stories that I mentioned probably stick out more than the others.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned the Daniel Johnson because I was around at that time playing with him on both ends before when he got there and then when he came back. And I just remember this small kid that can run and could throw a ball over 90 miles an hour, couldn't find the strike zone, throwing it at the backstop. And it was just such a interesting thing because he was such a nice guy, and still to this day, you could talk to him at
Yeah.
any time. But when he came back, it was just a totally different player, and he just developed
Mm-hmm.
like crazy. So that is a really good story, and so it's kind of cool that I actually know exactly what you're talking about.
It's cool too with Daniel, because I think one day really changed his life, and he had a great junior season. Like, he posted really good numbers, but he got drafted that early because his pro day was ridiculous.
Ah,
From what I understand is, they clock you from center field, and he was like 98 miles an hour,
oof,
and the scouts are like, okay, so if it doesn't work with the bat, we're just going to put him on the mound, and
yeah,
he's left-handed, and we'll see if he can pitch, right? It's single A. And it worked with the bat. I mean, he had a really good, career, and is still playing to this day. And still, I think he'll probably get back to the big leagues at one point. I mean, he was in El Paso last year at AAA. So it goes to show, like, one day can really change your life. He was going to get drafted, but his pro day was ridiculous, and it basically turned him into this top 6 round pick that everybody wanted.
wow, that's crazy. I did not know that. That's for sure. All
Mm-hmm.
right, you have seen some really cool stuff. You talked about the McCants moment was a big moment for you in terms of just being able to be on the call. But you've seen a March Madness win. You've seen the 2023 football run. I'm not sure if it was 2022 or 2021, but the WAC champs or WAC tournament champions for baseball, and then WAC champions for soccer, and softball's WAC dominance. What would you say was maybe the most impressive to you? That's got to be hard.
That's really hard. Probably the coolest game I got to call, I think, just take out the McCants buzzer beater. The coolest game probably was the 2017 bowl clinching game against South Alabama at home, to get to the bowl game where you had to win. And if you win that game, you get to a bowl game. And there's a cool story behind that. We're playing South Alabama. The final drive was bonkers. Like, I think they brought out the chain gang at least once, maybe twice, just to measure. And I'm
Wow.
like, of course we have to go through this. And the game ends, and the crowd was awesome. We're trying to find a place to go eat. I had a couple buddies from college in town, and everything's packed. And we finally get in this one place, and the TV's on, and Scott Van Pelt comes on with SportsCenter, and Van Pelt leads off SportsCenter with our post-game interview with Doug Martin that night.
Wow.
And his preface was, people say there's too many bowl games. There's not too many bowl games. Doug's emotional in tears post game with us, talking about how much this means to him, the program, the university, the community, getting to the bowl game for the first time in 57 years. So I'll never forget that game. That's probably the game that sticks out, even though it wasn't a postseason game. It sticks out to me because it led to that bowl game in 2017.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as like NCAA tournaments, the baseball regional in 2022, that was interesting because you're in Corvallis. The place is sold out. Oregon State has Cooper Jerpy on the mound, and Jerpy's a first-round pick. I think he was drafted 22nd overall by the Cardinals that year. And they weren't doing much against him, but we had Ian Mejia, who's in the Braves organization, and Mejia was dicing him up.
It was on
And
fire. Yeah.
we in New Mexico State had Oregon State in the ropes at one point, or an ESPNU. And the college baseball world was watching New Mexico State, and it was a tough year. I mean, things were not going well. I mean, they won 22 games and limped into the postseason. And so, I remember that night in Corvallis like it was yesterday. Like, they had Oregon State in the ropes. We go to extras, and just the week before that too, at the conference tournament, Trey, it was unlike anything I'd ever seen. How hot they got at the right time.
Yeah.
Because they literally limped into the postseason. They had to win 2 out of 3 their final regular season weekend to get in. They get there. I'm doing TV for the WAC in addition to radio for us. And I'm like, okay, I'll probably call a couple games on the radio. I can't imagine they're going to make a run. They upset Sam Houston on day one. I'm like, okay. They win day 2. I think it might have been Sacramento State. And they just keep on winning. And I'm just bouncing back and forth, booth to booth, because I'm doing TV on one booth and I'm doing radio for our games in the other booth. And by the end of that week, my voice was shot because I had been doing all those games. But I mean, I was thrilled for him. I mean, it was unlike any other thing I had seen calling games here. Just that stretch that they went on, kind of out of nowhere. So I'll remember that a lot. And then, of course, Teddy Allen in the NCAA tournament, 37 against UConn was unbelievable. So individual performance, I mean, that's up there.
Yeah, no kidding. That was probably the one that I went most wild for was March Madness. We'd been there a million times, and it's like we're right there, overtime, 2 points, game, and we finally got there. So that was really cool. So you got to be a part of all of that, which is amazing. Okay, my final question for you is, what is your dream game to call? If you could pick one game, maybe just an event, what would it be?
I get that question pretty often, especially early in my career, because I think the common question to ask somebody when you're doing this is, what's your dream job? And back early on, I'm from St. Louis, and I told everybody, be the voice of the St. Louis Cardinals.
Yeah.
And as your career goes on, you understand that you can't pick jobs because some of them just don't come open. People spend their entire lives in these gigs. I mean, some people are in these jobs for 45, 50 years. So their entire adult lives, they're in one job. It's very common in this industry.
Wasn't the Cardinals guy that?
Joe Buck? Mike Shannon was Jack Buck. Jack Buck spent I don't know how many years. And then Mike Shannon was the same way. Mike Shannon was there for 40 plus years. Ooh. And you just can't pick and choose where you go. And I truly mean that. Like that's a thing. Like you cannot pick and choose where you go. You can't say, well, I want to be this. It's almost like you have to say, I just want to call games at the highest level. And that's my goal. That's my dream now, is just to do games at the highest level.
Yeah.
Probably I would probably say like a national championship in basketball or something like that. I think that would be awesome. On my bucket list, though, is getting to Omaha for baseball. I going to Omaha would be so cool to do a game in Omaha. I've never been there as a fan either, but to get a game in Omaha would be really cool. So I think those two are probably at the top of the list. And just to do games that are important, that mean a lot to people. About a month ago, early December, I did. I'm lucky enough where they allow me to freelance here. So I was in Pittsburgh doing the NCAA Division II volleyball national championships on television. And that was really cool because, it's Division II, but it meant so much to, so many people there in those fan bases.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the culmination of a season at the D2 level. So that was really cool. And I took a lot of pride in that I got to do that this year. But, dream job, goal, all that kind of stuff. It's just to do games at the highest level. I think anybody, if you're a player, you want to play at the highest level. If you're a broadcaster, you want to broadcast at the highest level where it really means something to people. And, you can feel the crowd, the energy. I tell people all the time, this football season was the most fun I've ever had calling football here. And it wasn't because they won 10 games or they were really good. It was because every single home game we had, the energy was through the roof. And it just elevates what you do, right? I mean, if there's a couple thousand people there, it's going to be a tough game to call. But if there's 16, 17,000 screaming fans that are into it with cowbells and all that kind of stuff, forcing false start penalties and And it just makes my job easier, and it makes my job more enjoyable.
Yeah, you get to build off of that energy big time.
100%. Yep.
Adam, thank you so much for being on the show. I do appreciate it. I learned so much about what you do, and of course, I'll continue to watch what you do. Big nmsu guy, as you guys can see here.
I love it.
But thanks again, and I wish you the very best of luck going forward. I'll be sure to check in.
Appreciate you having me, Trey. Always good to see you.